What if I told you a veteran police officer once claimed he arrested Jesus Christ on a Dallas highway, and that night his life and the lives of countless others were never the same again? The rain was relentless, hammering down on the empty streets of Dallas like 1,000 tiny hammers, beating out a rhythm only the night could understand. It was April 12th, 3:15 a.m., when Detective Michael Rodriguez got the call on his radio. Unit 23, possible intoxicated subject walking barefoot along I-35 near mile marker 18. Proceed with caution. Michael exhaled heavily, gripping the steering wheel of his patrol car. 22 years on the force, and he thought he had seen everything. Drunks stumbling out of bars, homeless souls confused and lost, desperate people looking for warmth. Just another routine pickup, he muttered, though the weariness in his eyes told a different story. His navy blue uniform was crisp, his duty belt perfectly arranged. Pistol, cuffs, radio, flashlight. The habits drilled into him at the academy had never left. But behind the sharp uniform was a man unraveling. Marriage crumbling, a teenage son drifting away, and the ghost of his partner, David Chun, haunting every silent night. As the wipers squeaked across the windshield, Michael's thoughts spiraled. Isabella, his wife, hadn't spoken to him without bitterness in weeks. Gabriel, his 17-year-old son, barely acknowledged his presence. And David had died in a shootout 4 years ago, while Michael was 5 minutes late helping an elderly woman injured in a car accident. 5 minutes. That number chewed at him like acid, a wound that never healed. When the flashing reflection of mile marker 18 appeared through the rain, Michael flicked on his patrol lights. Red and blue beams cut through the darkness. And then he saw him. A man walking slowly along the shoulder of the freeway, illuminated in flashes of headlights from passing trucks. He wasn't staggering. He wasn't yelling. He wasn't even shivering. He wore nothing but a simple white tunic that clung to his body in the storm. His long dark hair plastered against his face, and his bare feet pressed against the soaked asphalt as if the cold and the sharp gravel meant nothing. Michael's instincts snapped into gear. He pulled over, spotlighting the figure, and stepped out into the downpour. "Hey, stop right there," he shouted, his voice cutting through the roar of rain and rushing traffic. The man paused and turned slowly, deliberately, as though he had been expecting the command. And then it happened, the detail Michael would replay in his mind for years. The man's gaze locked onto his eyes so deep and calm that Michael felt the hairs on the back of his neck rise. There was no fear, no defiance, only a peace that seemed almost impossible on a highway at 3 o'clock in the morning. "Good evening, Detective Rodriguez," the stranger said. Michael froze. The words were crystal clear despite the roar of the storm. But what stopped him cold was something else. He hadn't given his name. His badge was pinned under his rain-soaked jacket, barely visible. How could this man know who he was? "Papers," Michael demanded, recovering his stern tone, flashlight in one hand, the other resting close to his service weapon. "What are you doing out here? Do you realize how dangerous this is?" The man smiled faintly, as though the chaos of the world around them didn't apply to him. "I have no papers. My name and address, they do not matter." Michael frowned, taking a cautious step closer. Years of training told him this didn't fit any category he knew. The man wasn't drunk. He wasn't high. His pupils were normal. His posture steady. And yet, there was something undeniably strange. Something other. "I'll have to take you in," Michael said, reaching for his cuffs. To his surprise, the man nodded gently, offering his wrist without a word of protest. No resistance, no excuses, no attempt to flee, just acceptance. As Michael fastened the cuffs, his eyes caught on the stranger's wrists. There were scars, circular, deep, like wounds that had healed long ago. Wounds that shouldn't have been possible. He hesitated, then shook it off. "Do you feel cold?" he asked, almost involuntarily. "The cold is temporary," the man replied calmly. "Like everything else." Lightning cracked across the sky, lighting the freeway in a blinding flash. And in that moment, for the first time in decades of service, Detective Michael Rodriguez felt the stirrings of something he had long buried. Fear not of the man he was arresting, but of what that man's presence might mean. Back inside the patrol car, drenched and silent, Michael glanced in the rear-view mirror. The stranger sat quietly in the back seat, cuffs glinting in the light, gazing out the rain-streaked window with an expression that wasn't worry or anger, but something far more disarming. Compassion for Michael. This was supposed to be just another arrest. But it was 3 o'clock in the morning in Dallas, Texas, and Detective Michael Rodriguez had just put Jesus Christ in the back of his squad car. And nothing in his life or in the lives of those around him would ever be the same again. The rain outside the Dallas precinct was nothing compared to the storm raging inside Detective Michael Rodriguez's heart. On the surface, he was everything a police department could want in a veteran. 22 years of service, medals for bravery, commendations stacked neatly in his file. His uniform was always crisp, his boots polished, his duty belt arranged with military precision. To colleagues, he was Steady Mike, the detective who never cracked. But behind closed doors, Michael's life was falling apart piece by piece. His wife, Isabella, once the love of his youth, now spoke to him in clipped tones. Her warmth buried under years of late-night shifts, broken promises, and silences that lasted too long. Their home, a modest 2-story in a quiet Dallas neighborhood, had become less a sanctuary and more a battlefield. Arguments erupted over the smallest things. The unpaid bills, his constant absence, the way he seemed emotionally unreachable. Their 17-year-old son, Gabriel, had grown into a stranger under the same roof. Once a boy who begged his father to play catch in the yard, now a teenager hardened by disappointment. He spoke in monosyllables, eyes glued to his phone. Walls of indifference as high as the concrete projects Michael patrolled. For months, father and son had barely exchanged more than a few obligatory words, and the silence between them carried more weight than any shouting match. The ghosts of the job haunted Michael as much as his fractured family. Chief among them was David Chun, his partner, his brother in arms. 4 years earlier, David had bled out in a South Dallas alley after a shootout with gang members. Michael was supposed to be there. He was supposed to cover his friend's back, but he had been late, 5 minutes late, because he had stopped to help an elderly woman, Mrs. Patterson, who had collapsed after a car accident. The number echoed in his head like a drum beat that never stopped. In those minutes, David's life ended, and Michael's sense of self-worth went with it. He told no one how he blamed himself, but guilt clung to him like a shadow he couldn't shake. Every time he polished his badge, every time he strapped on his gun, he heard David's voice calling for backup, and every time he remembered not being there. At the station, his colleagues joked that Michael had become a ghost of himself. The man who once laughed easily now wore a permanent scowl. Coffee replaced sleep. Silence replaced small talk. And cynicism became his armor. Sergeant Williams, a longtime friend, noticed. "You're burning out, Hermano," he once warned. But Michael just brushed him off. There was no room for weakness in his line of work. Even his body carried the marks of 2 decades of battle. A scar ran along his left cheek from a knife fight years earlier. His salt and pepper hair, once thick and black, had thinned prematurely. His joints ached after every double shift. But still he pressed on. That's the job, he told himself. The job came first, always. And yet, deep down, he knew the job had already cost him everything that mattered. The guilt bled into his marriage. Isabella had begged him to take fewer shifts, to be present for Gabriel, to let go of the obsession with proving himself on the streets. But Michael didn't know how to stop. The badge was the only place where he still felt some measure of control, some fleeting sense of purpose. At home, he was a failure as a husband and father. On the streets, at least, he was Detective Rodriguez, the man people called in their worst moments. The man who kept chaos at bay. But even the badge couldn't silence the questions that clawed at him in the dead of night. Was it worth it? Was the sacrifice of his family, his health, and his peace of mind really worth the paycheck and the uniform? Or had he traded the love of those closest to him for an illusion of control? Every night, Michael woke up at 3:17 a.m., the exact time David had died. It was never the alarm clock, never the radio static, never the rain tapping the window. It was the guilt shaking him awake, reminding him that no matter how many arrests he made, no matter how many commendations he earned, he could never undo that night. In the closet tucked behind his bedroom door, he kept David's service weapon. Sometimes in his darkest hours, he sat alone staring at it, replaying scenarios in his head. If only he had taken a different route. If only he had been faster. If only he had chosen differently. That weapon was both a reminder and a curse. Proof of his failure. Proof of his survival. And so on that rain-soaked night, in April, when his radio crackled with the call about a barefoot man wandering the freeway, Michael thought it was just another routine case. He didn't know that this encounter would crack open the walls he had spent years building. He didn't know that the man he was about to arrest would speak to the deepest wounds of his heart. To everyone else, it looked like just another late-night patrol. To Michael, it was supposed to be just another name in a long list of arrests. But in truth, this night was different, because this time the man waiting on that highway wasn't just another lost soul. This time, Detective Michael Rodriguez was about to meet Jesus Christ. The holding area of the Dallas precinct buzzed with its usual night chaos. Paperwork shuffling, drunkards cursing, the stale odor of reheated coffee mixed with disinfectant. For Michael Rodriguez, though, everything else faded into the background. His eyes kept drifting to the man he had just brought in. Most suspects protested, cursed, or bargained. This man sat calmly in the chair, hands cuffed in front of him, posture straight, breathing steady. It wasn't the quiet of defeat, nor the arrogance of defiance. It was something altogether different. The quiet of someone who had already accepted the outcome long before the arrest. Sergeant Williams, towering and broad-shouldered, chuckled when Michael led the stranger past the desk. Another prophet of midnight, huh, Mike? Place is crawling with him lately. He expected Michael to laugh, but Michael didn't. This one's different, he muttered, his voice low, almost reverent. Williams raised an eyebrow, but let it go. In the harsh fluorescent light of the interrogation room, the details became clearer. The man's wrists, though reddened by the cuffs, bore scars that didn't make sense. Round, deep, almost like puncture wounds healed long ago. They weren't the jagged marks of accidents or fights Michael had seen before. These were symmetrical, purposeful, like the echoes of nails driven through flesh. Michael found himself staring longer than he should have. "You ever been injured?" he asked finally, the words slipping out before he could stop them. The man lifted his eyes. "Once for love." The answer lodged in Michael's chest. For a second, he forgot he was supposed to be in control. He broke eye contact, trying to compose himself, but the man's presence pressed in like a weight he couldn't shake. Back in his seat, Michael asked another question, his tone a mix of irritation and curiosity. "Why didn't you resist arrest? Why let me put cuffs on you without a fight?" The man's answer was almost a whisper, yet echoed in Michael's chest. "Because sometimes justice begins by appearing unjust. You needed to bring me here so that you could finally bring yourself here." Michael's jaw tightened. He didn't understand what the man meant, but the words slid under his armor like a blade. This wasn't just another suspect. This wasn't just another long night. Every detail, the scars, the calm, the impossible knowledge, the way he spoke of love and justice as though he had written the definitions himself. All of it added up to something Michael wasn't ready to name. But in the pit of his stomach, he knew. This man wasn't simply lost, confused, or delusional. And as Detective Michael Rodriguez sat across from the stranger in the white tunic, a terrifying, electrifying thought pressed against his mind. What if the man he had just arrested was Jesus Christ? The interrogation room at the Dallas precinct was a box of harsh fluorescent light and peeling gray paint. For 2 decades, Detective Michael Rodriguez had broken down hardened suspects in this very space. He knew the choreography, the heavy chairs scraping against the floor, the metal table that separated guilt from justice, the way silence could crush a man until the truth spilled out. But that night, it wasn't the suspect under the microscope. It was him. The man in the white tunic sat cuffed at the table, posture steady, eyes calm. He didn't fidget, didn't twitch, didn't even blink the way most suspects did when confronted with silence. Instead, he studied Michael with the serene intensity of a doctor examining a patient or a judge weighing a verdict. Michael leaned forward, adopting his usual stance of authority. "Let's start simple. Your name." The man's voice was quiet, but it carried as though the room itself wanted to deliver it. "Names are temporary. They are not who I am. I need your legal name. What does your heart say about my identity?" The question slipped under Michael's armor like a blade. He slammed his notepad shut, irritation rising. "My heart doesn't interrogate suspects." But the man only leaned back, the faintest trace of compassion softening his gaze. "I'm the one who knows your deepest pain, Michael. The pain you've carried alone." The detective stiffened, his name again. Personal, intimate, spoken not with menace, but with tenderness. "Tell me about David Chun," the man continued. The sound of that name hit Michael like a gunshot. His knuckles whitened around his pen, his chest tightened. David, the partner who had died in that South Dallas alley. The wound Michael had locked away behind walls of silence. "How do you know that name?" Michael demanded, his voice cracking. The man's eyes did not waver. "I know you wake up every night at 3:17, the exact time he died. I know you keep his service weapon in a closet and stare at it for hours, asking yourself what might have been. I know the guilt you carry is heavier than your badge." Michael's legs buckled. He collapsed into the chair across from the man, his heart pounding like a drum. From behind the one-way glass, Sergeant Williams watched in stunned silence. He had seen Mike break suspects before, but never seen Mike himself unravel like this. "I should have been there," Michael whispered, his voice shaking. "If I had been faster, if I hadn't stopped for that old woman." The man leaned forward, his cuffed hands resting gently on the table. "That night was not your failure. David made his choice, and you made yours. Do you remember the woman you helped? Mrs. Patterson." Michael's eyes flickered with recognition. "She was hurt. I drove her to the hospital. That woman was the grandmother of 3 orphans. Had she died that night, those children would have been scattered, lost to the streets. You didn't lose 1 life that night, Michael. You saved 4. Tears welled up in Michael's eyes. For 4 years, he had replayed the tragedy as a story of failure. Never once had he considered that his delay had been the reason someone else lived. The room spun as the weight of his guilt shifted, cracking open under the force of the man's words. "Why are you telling me this?" Michael whispered. "Because your suffering is mine," the man replied. "When one of my children suffers, I suffer with them. You have carried this burden long enough." Something in the air changed. The room felt heavier, charged as though invisible hands pressed against Michael's chest. He wasn't interrogating a criminal. He was standing, no, kneeling before something greater than law, greater than justice. "I don't understand," Michael said, tears streaking his face. "Who are you?" The man's answer was gentle yet undeniable. "I'm not here to judge you, Michael. I'm here to set you free." Williams, watching through the glass, rubbed his eyes unsettled. He swore he could feel the man's words vibrating in his bones, though he hadn't heard them directly. Later, he would admit, "I don't know what happened in that room, but I know Mike walked in carrying a burden and walked out lighter." At that moment, Michael cradled his head in his hands. For years, his badge had been a shield against chaos. Now sitting across from this man, he realized the badge could not shield him from himself. His guilt, his broken family, his pain. They had all been exposed under a light brighter than any fluorescent bulb. And as dawn crept closer, Detective Michael Rodriguez understood with terrifying clarity. The interrogation room wasn't meant to break the stranger. It was meant to break him. The fluorescent hum of the interrogation room seemed to fade, replaced by a silence so profound that Michael Rodriguez felt as if the world outside had stopped spinning. Across the table, the man in the soaked white tunic leaned forward, his cuffed hands resting gently, his eyes steady. Michael's voice broke, raw and desperate. "I don't understand. What do you want from me?" The man's expression softened, his words deliberate. "Michael, you have lived as if you were chained. Chained by guilt, chained by fear, chained by the belief that you failed. But I tell you this, your guilt is not your prison anymore. I'm here to unlock it." Michael blinked rapidly, trying to steady his breathing. Unlock it. You don't know what I've done. You don't know what it cost me. The man's voice deepened, carrying an authority that no badge, no courtroom, no commanding officer could match. I know everything. I know the nights you wake at 3:17, the exact time your partner died. I know the silence between you and Isabella, the distance with your son, Gabriel. I know the questions you've buried. Can you ever change? And I know the answer you've never dared to believe. Yes, you can. Behind the one-way glass, Sergeant Williams shifted uneasily. He couldn't hear the words, but he could see Mike trembling, tears falling freely now. He whispered to a fellow officer, "It looks like the suspect's interrogating him instead." Michael's hands trembled as he slammed them on the table. Then why do I feel like I'm drowning every day? Why can't I breathe without remembering David's face? The man leaned closer, the distance between them charged with something Michael couldn't explain. Because you've been carrying a weight that was never yours to carry. David's death was not your failure. You saved 4 lives that night when you helped Mrs. Patterson. That was your choice. That was your calling. Do you not see, Michael? Your life has always been about saving, not losing. For the first time in years, Michael let out a sob that tore through his chest. His entire body shook as if the weight of 2 decades had finally broken loose. Then what am I supposed to do? How do I live with all of this? The man's answer came like a bomb. You forgive. You forgive David for leaving. You forgive Isabella for the arguments. You forgive Gabriel for his silence. And above all, you forgive yourself. Michael's head dropped into his hands, his tears soaking the notepad beneath him. Forgive himself. The thought had never crossed his mind. He had lived as though punishment was the only language he deserved. The man's voice grew gentler, though its power never lessened. Michael, listen to me. The law has its place. Justice has its role. But mercy is what gives life. You're not defined by the moment you think you failed. You are defined by the lives you've saved, the compassion you've shown, and the love you are still capable of giving. Michael raised his eyes, red and swollen. Why me? Why are you telling me this? The man's gaze pierced straight through him. Because you're my brother. Because I have waited for this night. Because I love you. The words landed like thunder, shaking Michael's soul in a way bullets and beatings never had. He stared at the scars on the man's wrists again, the circular marks that looked like wounds from another age. His lips trembled. Who are you really? The man smiled faintly, the corners of his eyes softening. I'm the one who was broken, so you could be whole. I'm the one who bore the weight, so you could be free. I'm Jesus Christ. The room seemed to expand and contract all at once. Michael's breath caught in his throat. Part of him wanted to deny it, to rationalize, to say it was impossible. Yet every fiber of his being knew the truth. The peace in those eyes, the love in that voice, the authority in those words, there was no denying it. From the observation window, Williams rubbed his temples. He saw Mike fall to his knees beside the table, his hands pressed against his face. Williams whispered, "Lord, what's happening in there?" Michael wept openly now, his voice breaking, "I'm not worthy." But Jesus, still cuffed, leaned closer, his voice steady and kind. "You are worthy, Michael. Not because you are perfect, but because you are mine. You've punished yourself long enough. Tonight, the punishment ends." The words settled like a verdict. Final, unshakable. And for the first time since that night in the alley, Detective Michael Rodriguez felt something he hadn't known in years. He felt free. Years later, Michael would stand before packed auditoriums in Dallas, sharing his testimony. Isabella and Gabriel would beam from the front row as he spoke of redemption, of second chances, of a night Jesus Christ walked into his interrogation room, disguised as an arrest. The Dallas Police Department would transform under his leadership, becoming known nationwide for community, healing rather than punishment. And every officer who served under him would carry forward one simple truth. Sometimes the greatest arrest is the one that sets you free.